Hello again, it's Pastor Pete here with the expanded video version of the meditation for May 16, 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And today I want to reflect on three things, two Bible passages and then a quote. The first passage is from Ephesians 2 verse 21, where we read Paul writing, "In him," that is Christ, "the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord." The second reading is 2 Corinthians 6, verse 16, where he asks the rhetorical question, what agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? So there's the word temple again. And of course, the assumption is there is no agreement between the temple of God and idols. For we are, he's talking to believers, we are the temple of the living God. As God has said, "I will live with them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people." A familiar echo from the Exodus story. We've heard that one a few times as God makes that his purpose. And then here's the quote. "As important as it is to mark the places where we meet God, I worry about what happens when we build a house for God. Do we build a house so we can choose when to go see God? Do we build God a house in lieu or instead of having God stay at ours?" I am hoping people are learning more what it means to have God stay at ours. That's a quote from a book by B.B. Taylor called An Altar in the World. B.B. Taylor is also the preacher who inspired the sermon that I shared on the Kingdom series last weekend. My sister, who is a pastor and is now a professor of worship arts at Trinity Western, posted the quote from B.B. Taylor last week, and it has been causing me to reflect. It's one of those things where you read it and it just sits there and it comes back. And I've been reflecting on it a lot for my own personal sake and in a broader way. And I want to share some of that thinking or what I recognize in it and these two passages with you today. We're all in various stages of missing church. A huge part of that is about missing getting together with our people. But there's undeniably also a part that is about the building and the artifacts and worship rituals that come with it. I miss, and so this is an opportunity to reflect in the sense of why do I miss a certain thing, and is it actually healthy or unhealthy to miss that particular thing, to be that attached to that particular thing? I have this with hockey. I miss hockey. I was really looking forward to the playoffs. But when I stop and reflect, it's not that important that that's missing out of my life. That's just a kind of a bonus thing, an extra. So too with the questions raised by this quote and these passages. The quote gets at the important question of whether we have boxed God in by having a building we think of, and we use this language, I hear us using it, and I use it myself by accident sometimes. We think of it as God's house. And it raises the question, do we prefer having God in a house of God's own so that God does not have to live in our homes or in our hearts? Do we prefer having God in a house of God's own so that God doesn't have to live so much in our own hearts and homes? Wow. What a good question to ponder in a pandemic when we do not have access to God's house? The question raises a huge danger that we might be in. Do you see the danger when you think of it? Contrary to the Old Testament language of God's house or God's temple, where indeed God did in the Exodus journey come to live among his people, God left the building. God has left the building. When the temple curtain tore from top to bottom, mind you, showing who tore it upon Jesus' death, God left the building. God left to live in each believer. Pentecost was the day that was formalized or enacted, I could say, with tongues of fire and special gifts of understanding and speaking coming to rest on each believer present there. Paul, the apostle, makes that clear when in several places he says, in Christ, the new building is joined together, brick upon brick, cornerstone upon cornerstone of people, and is built up to become a living temple, not an inanimate temple, not a building anymore. Spirit-led, spirit-filled people are the new temple, individually and collectively. We, together, are the temple of the living God. He is saying there is no physical building that is God's or only a place where God is. It is God living in people's hearts that creates temples out of them and out of groups of them. One of the things I love to speculate about or to read articles about and see video of is schools of fish and flocks of birds that move through the world as if they are one living organism all by itself. Starlings are the ones that are famous for that, but you've seen schools of fish do the same, and they all seem to turn at the same time. I saw it a little bit in the sandhill cranes that flew over a couple weeks ago. They seem to act as one organism, even though it's a bunch of individuals. That's what Paul is describing here as well. Individually and collectively, they create a temple, a place where God lives. And so there's some irony there in terms of how then when we get that sense of being part of being God's temple, our urge, our desire is to build a building to celebrate that in and to find God in. And that's where the danger that the quote raises exists. I've seen, and I know of at least one church that I know a fair bit of the history of in Michigan, where this was part of their principle in forming as a congregation. And so when they got so big and they couldn't use the high school gym, I think it was, first a grade school gym, then a high school gym that they had, and they were determined not to own property, then they had to face 20, 40 years after their forming this question again, and they chose to buy property and build a building. It seems to be very, very hard to hang on to the lack of a building. The only organization that I know actually that has accomplished this is AA. Alcoholics Anonymous does not own anything. Maybe they're doing better than the church. So in this time of not having access to the wood and brick building part of being church, we do well to reflect on the danger of making the building an idol and of putting God in a box called church instead of having him live in and through us individually and collectively, even in a pandemic, and maybe especially in a pandemic. This is good matter, good thoughts, good things to reflect on, to take some time yourself in your own prayer and ask God, how can I better be a temple on your behalf in this pandemic affected world? And in that, maybe we can learn to let go or refocus a little bit on the idea of the building and collecting in the building to meet God. And we can have God finding us and us finding God in places we didn't expect it because we weren't looking. The sermon that I'm planning to post today for this weekend covers something similar. Until we meet again, shalom and serenity to you all.